67 senators signed an ultimatum in 72 hours. Not a symbolic resolution, not a political statement, a constitutional directive with the weight of Article 1 behind it. That number represents the fastest bipartisan mobilization in Senate history, and by January 8th, it ended a presidency. Think about what that means. We're talking about senators who haven't agreed on lunch menus finding unanimous ground on executive removal. The midnight emergency session on January 5th wasn't scheduled. It was demanded by a classified intelligence briefing that historians are already calling democracy's inflection point. According to sources familiar with the briefing, the evidence presented wasn't circumstantial, it was systematic. We're not talking about policy disagreements or political theater. We're talking about 18 months of documented constitutional violations that left the Senate with exactly one choice. The Panama Papers exposed financial corruption across governments. This exposed something worse: foreign communications intercepts revealing coordination that violated every oath of office taken. Sources speaking on background describe senators leaving that briefing room in complete silence. Several requested immediate legal counsel. Here's what makes this truly unprecedented. The ultimatum wasn't delivered by opposition leadership. It came from the Senate Majority Leader, flanked by colleagues from both parties, reading a statement that took exactly 93 seconds to deliver. Pay close attention to what they made clear they would no longer accept. While the administration was busy crafting damage control narratives, constitutional scholars were already drafting articles of impeachment that would have passed both chambers within 48 hours. The resignation option wasn't mercy, it was mathematics. January 2nd, inside the secure briefing room beneath the Capitol, senators witnessed evidence that changed everything. Not allegations, not speculation, documented proof that Article 2 powers had been systematically weaponized against Article 1 oversight. The intelligence community had built an ironclad case over months of investigation. Sources confirmed the briefing included intercepted communications spanning 17 different instances of constitutional breach. Each senator received a classified summary that left no room for interpretation. Former Attorney General Patricia Volkov, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the evidence as the most comprehensive case for executive accountability ever assembled. We're witnessing the moment American democracy proved it could enforce its own boundaries. The 72-hour countdown wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated to provide exactly enough time for constitutional succession protocols while preventing any attempt at executive branch obstruction. And it gets worse. The evidence trail connected to ongoing investigations in 3 separate federal agencies, each building parallel cases that would have converged regardless of Senate action. The ultimatum simply accelerated inevitable accountability. Let that sink in. This wasn't political maneuvering. This was constitutional enforcement. January 2nd, 2:17 in the morning, the Senate Intelligence Committee received a briefing that changed the trajectory of American democracy. Not a routine intelligence update, a comprehensive presentation of evidence that took 4 hours to deliver and left 14 senators requesting immediate legal consultation. According to sources familiar with the classified materials, the intelligence community had been building this case since July 2025. Intercepted foreign communications revealed coordination patterns that violated every constitutional boundary established in Article 2. We're talking about documented exchanges with foreign operatives discussing domestic policy manipulation in real time. The briefing wasn't theoretical. Signal intelligence analysts presented transcripts of conversations where executive branch officials disclosed classified information to unauthorized foreign contacts. Each exchange was time-stamped, geolocated, and cross-referenced with official government actions taken within 48 hours of those conversations. Former Attorney General Patricia Volkov, speaking on background, described the evidence as the most comprehensive breach of executive authority ever documented. This isn't speculation about influence. This is recorded proof of coordination that systematically undermined constitutional separation of powers. Here's where it gets devastating. The intelligence originated from 3 separate sources. NSA Signals Intelligence captured the communications. FBI counterintelligence confirmed the domestic connections. CIA human intelligence verified the foreign operational structure. When all three agencies reach identical conclusions independently, that's not coincidence. That's confirmation. Sources speaking on condition of anonymity reveal the administration had been under targeted surveillance since August 2025, following credible intelligence about compromise at the highest levels. The investigation wasn't fishing expedition. It was surgical intelligence gathering focused on specific constitutional violations. Think about what that means. While the executive branch was publicly dismissing oversight requests as partisan theater, intelligence professionals were documenting systematic abuse of presidential powers in real time. Every claim of executive privilege was being contradicted by evidence of unauthorized foreign coordination. The briefing included 18 months of pattern analysis showing how classified intelligence was being shared with unauthorized foreign contacts within hours of National Security Council meetings. Sources confirm multiple instances where sensitive military intelligence reached foreign operatives before reaching congressional leadership responsible for oversight, and it gets worse. Parallel investigations were already underway in Treasury, Justice, and Defense departments, each tracking different aspects of the same constitutional breach. The Senate Intelligence Committee wasn't receiving isolated incidents. They were seeing systematic coordination that compromised national security at the highest levels. According to reports obtained by Senate investigators, the pattern extended beyond policy coordination. Foreign operatives were receiving advance notice of federal law enforcement actions, diplomatic initiatives, and classified military operations. That's not influence peddling. That's operational compromise of constitutional governance. The evidence trail connected 17 different instances spanning 14 months, where executive branch decisions aligned perfectly with foreign operational objectives within 72 hours of those communications. Statistical analysis confirmed the probability of coincidence was mathematically impossible. Sources familiar with the investigation reveal the intelligence community had been preparing this briefing for months, waiting for the right moment to present evidence that would leave no room for political interpretation. January 2nd became that moment when intercepted communications revealed planned obstruction of congressional oversight scheduled for the following week. The administration's response to the briefing request proved the intelligence assessment correct. Instead of cooperation, they deployed legal delays that confirmed consciousness of guilt. That pattern of obstruction became additional evidence of systematic constitutional violation. By January 3rd, all 14 Intelligence Committee members had requested classified legal counsel. That's unprecedented. When senators need lawyers after an intelligence briefing, the evidence presented isn't ambiguous, it's prosecutorial. Every defense strategy collapsed within 48 hours, not through political maneuvering, through systematic legal dismantling that left constitutional scholars calling it the most comprehensive accountability case in American history. Executive privilege claims died first. January 3rd, 9:37 a.m., Chief Justice Helena Morrison delivered a private memorandum to Senate leadership that sources describe as constitutionally devastating. The memo, leaked to congressional investigators, established that executive privilege cannot shield coordination with foreign operatives from legislative oversight. That's not opinion, that's constitutional law. The administration's legal team attempted to invoke national security exemptions. Treasury Department investigators responded by providing Senate leadership with financial records proving those same national security protocols had been violated through unauthorized foreign coordination. When your defense strategy becomes evidence of additional crimes, that's not litigation, that's confession. According to sources familiar with the legal analysis, constitutional law experts from Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown reached identical conclusions independently. Professor Rachel Chen, former Supreme Court clerk, stated on record that the evidence presented the clearest case for executive accountability since Watergate. Not similar to Watergate, more comprehensive than Watergate. Here's what makes this truly unprecedented. The defense team's strategy revealed additional constitutional violations in real time. Every legal filing disclosed coordination patterns that contradicted previous administration statements under oath. Sources speaking on background describe watching defense attorneys realize their own arguments were implicating their client in additional federal crimes. International implications accelerated the timeline. January 4th, NATO allies delivered coordinated diplomatic messages expressing concern about continued executive branch compromise. Classified diplomatic cables obtained by Senate investigators confirm European intelligence services had identified the same foreign coordination patterns months earlier. Our allies knew before Congress did. Think about what that means. While American legislators were requesting basic oversight information, foreign governments were briefing their parliaments about compromise at the highest levels of the United States government. The constitutional crisis wasn't just domestic, it was damaging American credibility across every international relationship that matters. The human cost became undeniable. Federal employees began requesting transfers out of executive branch positions at unprecedented rates. Sources confirm Justice Department attorneys filed formal complaints about political interference in ongoing investigations. Pentagon officials documented instances where military intelligence was being shared with unauthorized personnel within hours of classified briefings. Military morale statistics released to congressional oversight committees showed confidence in civilian leadership had dropped 43% since July 2025. That's not political polling, that's operational readiness assessment showing systematic damage to command structure integrity. Diplomatic relationships deteriorated measurably. Sources familiar with classified State Department assessments reveal 5 allied governments had suspended intelligence sharing protocols due to concerns about operational security. When allies stop sharing intelligence, that's not diplomatic tension. That's fundamental breach of trust that takes decades to rebuild. Former Defense Secretary Marcus Rodriguez, testifying before the Intelligence Committee, stated that foreign coordination patterns compromised 3 separate military operations and endangered intelligence assets in 2 allied countries. These weren't theoretical risks. These were documented operational failures resulting directly from unauthorized information sharing. Constitutional law professor Diana Hernandez, Georgetown University, provided written testimony establishing that the evidence met every legal threshold for high crimes and misdemeanors. Her analysis, distributed to all 100 senators, concluded that failure to act would establish dangerous precedent, undermining constitutional separation of powers permanently. Supreme Court historian James Fletcher confirmed the Chief Justice's private memo represented the fastest constitutional guidance ever provided to Congress during a separation of powers crisis. The speed of response indicated institutional recognition that constitutional boundaries were being systematically violated beyond any previous precedent. And this is where it gets truly significant. Every attempted defense became additional evidence of obstruction. Legal filings contradicted previous sworn testimony. Privilege claims revealed awareness of wrongdoing. Executive branch legal strategy systematically confirmed congressional accusations rather than refuting them. Sources familiar with the Justice Department's parallel investigation confirm federal prosecutors had prepared sealed indictments covering the same constitutional violations documented in the Senate briefing. The congressional timeline wasn't racing against politics. It was racing against federal law enforcement actions that would have created constitutional succession crisis. The systematic dismantling wasn't political theater, it was constitutional enforcement reaching inevitable conclusion. When every defense strategy generates additional evidence of guilt, the legal outcome becomes mathematically certain. Think about what that implies for executive accountability going forward. January 5th, 2:17 in the afternoon, Senate Majority Leader Catherine Walsh stepped to the podium with a document that would end a presidency. 72 hours. That's what democracy gave executive accountability to resolve itself before constitutional enforcement began. The ultimatum wasn't negotiation, it was mathematical calculation. Resignation by January 8th, 5 p.m., or Article 1 proceedings would commence at 5:01. Sources familiar with the closed-door confrontation describe a meeting where constitutional law replaced political courtesy entirely. According to reconstructed dialogue from the confrontation, Walsh delivered the message with surgical precision. We have 67 signatures. We have constitutional authority. We have irrefutable evidence. You have 72 hours to choose how this ends. The response, sources confirm, was immediate legal consultation rather than substantive defense. Think about the significance of that timeline. Not weeks for political maneuvering, not months for legal delays, 72 hours for constitutional governance to assert itself over executive branch compromise. When senators provide specific deadlines with mathematical precision, that's not political pressure, that's constitutional enforcement. The administration's response confirmed every intelligence assessment about consciousness of guilt. Instead of addressing the evidence, legal teams began crafting resignation language within hours of the ultimatum delivery. Sources speaking on background describe frantic attempts to negotiate transition terms rather than defend against constitutional accusations. Social media became evidence of institutional breakdown in real time. Posted messages contradicted sworn testimony. Public statements revealed information that should have remained classified. Each digital outburst provided additional documentation of compromised decision-making that constitutional scholars called unprecedented. Republican senators held emergency caucus sessions that lasted until 3 a.m. on January 6th. Sources familiar with the discussions reveal mathematical analysis of political survival versus constitutional duty. When party loyalty conflicts with oath of office obligations, the oath wins. That's not politics. That's constitutional governance. The leaked conversations from presidential legal team meetings show systematic recognition that defense was impossible. Strategy sessions focused entirely on damage limitation rather than evidence refutation. When attorneys abandon defense for damage control, the legal outcome becomes inevitable. Strategic leaks accelerated timeline pressure deliberately. Sources confirm Senate leadership authorized release of specific evidence details to demonstrate the impossibility of executive branch defense. Each leaked document eliminated another day of potential delay tactics. January 7th, Senate leadership received formal notification that federal prosecutors had completed parallel investigations with identical conclusions. The congressional timeline wasn't racing against politics anymore. It was coordinating with federal law enforcement to prevent constitutional crisis during transition. Here's where temporal pressure became constitutional necessity. The evidence trail included coordination scheduled for January 9th through 11th that would have compromised additional national security protocols. The 72-hour deadline prevented ongoing damage rather than just addressing past violations. Bipartisan signature count reached 73 by January 7th. Sources describe senators requesting to add their names to the ultimatum even after delivery. When constitutional accountability becomes mathematical certainty, political calculation becomes irrelevant. The final hours demonstrated complete institutional isolation. Cabinet officials began distance meetings with congressional leadership. Pentagon brass requested clarification about chain of command protocols. Federal agency heads initiated succession planning procedures without executive authorization. Republican leadership released private statement acknowledging constitutional evidence superseded party loyalty. Senate Minority Leader Harrison Beck, speaking on background, confirmed his caucus recognized defending the indefensible would damage conservative principles permanently. Party survival required constitutional compliance. January 8th, morning intelligence briefings were delivered directly to congressional leadership rather than executive branch officials. When intelligence communities bypass compromised executive authority, that signals complete institutional recognition of constitutional breakdown. The countdown reached mathematical conclusion. Resignation announcement preparation began January 8th, 4 p.m. Constitutional deadline approached with clockwork precision. When institutional accountability operates with temporal certainty, political maneuvering becomes impossible. Sources confirm the final ultimatum delivery included specific constitutional language about Article 1 authorities that left zero ambiguity about congressional intent. 72 hours of constitutional enforcement proved American democracy could police its own boundaries when institutional survival demanded action. That deadline wasn't arbitrary, it was constitutional mathematics reaching inevitable conclusion. January 8th, 4:47 in the afternoon, constitutional democracy enforced its own boundaries. The resignation announcement arrived via written statement exactly 13 minutes before the 72-hour deadline expired. Not negotiation, not political theater, constitutional accountability reaching mathematical conclusion. The statement delivered to Senate leadership simultaneously with public release acknowledged what sources described as an untenable position given overwhelming constitutional evidence. 3 paragraphs, 142 words. The most efficient executive departure in American history. Constitutional succession protocols activated immediately. Vice President Margaret Torres received oath administration at 5:12 p.m., establishing seamless transition that prevented any gap in executive authority. Sources familiar with succession planning confirm every protocol had been rehearsed to prevent constitutional vacuum during transition. Think about what that timeline represents. Constitutional deadlines enforced with mathematical precision, institutional accountability operating exactly as designed. When democracy's enforcement mechanisms function this efficiently, that's not luck. That's constitutional design proving its own effectiveness. Senate leadership delivered joint statement from both parties that sources describe as unprecedented bipartisan constitutional vindication. Senate Majority Leader Walsh and Minority Leader Beck, flanked by Intelligence Committee leadership, read prepared remarks lasting exactly 4 minutes. Democracy prevailed through constitutional enforcement, not political maneuvering. According to sources present during statement preparation, the bipartisan language emphasized institutional preservation over partisan victory. Constitutional accountability transcended political advantage because institutional survival required enforcement regardless of party affiliation. When constitutional duty supersedes political calculation, that's democracy functioning as designed. Federal agencies responded with coordinated continuity measures that demonstrated institutional resilience under constitutional stress. Justice Department announced ongoing investigation would continue under new executive leadership with expanded congressional oversight. Pentagon confirmed operational readiness maintained throughout transition period. Intelligence community released classified assessment to congressional leadership confirming national security protocols had been restored to constitutional compliance within hours of succession. Sources familiar with the assessment describe systematic repair of compromised operational security that had endangered allied relationships for months. International reaction validated constitutional enforcement through immediate diplomatic recognition. NATO leadership released statement within 2 hours expressing confidence in restored American institutional integrity. Allied intelligence services resumed suspended cooperation protocols that afternoon. Market response demonstrated institutional confidence restoration in real time. Financial indicators stabilized immediately following succession announcement. Sources familiar with economic analysis describe the market reaction as validation that constitutional accountability strengthened rather than weakened institutional credibility. Expert constitutional analysis confirmed the precedent established permanent deterrent effect against future executive overreach. Georgetown law professor Diana Hernandez, speaking on record, stated that the 72-hour enforcement model created constitutional boundary enforcement mechanism that would influence executive behavior for decades. Justice Department leadership announced expanded cooperation with congressional oversight committees that sources describe as restoration of constitutional separation of powers to operational effectiveness. The investigation continuation under new executive leadership demonstrated that accountability transcends individual office holders. Former Attorney General Patricia Volkoff, now speaking publicly, confirmed the constitutional crisis represented the most comprehensive test of American democratic institutions since founding. The successful enforcement proved constitutional design remained operationally effective under extreme institutional stress. Sources familiar with succession planning reveal the new administration immediately implemented enhanced congressional oversight protocols that exceeded constitutional minimums. When institutional survival requires transparency, political secrecy becomes constitutional impossibility. Congressional leadership from both parties scheduled joint oversight hearings to examine systemic vulnerabilities exposed by the constitutional crisis. Sources confirm bipartisan commitment to strengthening institutional safeguards against future executive branch compromise. The resignation represented accountability satisfaction without institutional damage. Constitutional enforcement operated precisely as designed while preserving democratic continuity. When accountability mechanisms function this effectively, that validates constitutional design rather than exposing constitutional weakness. Think about the institutional precedent established. 72 hours from ultimatum to resolution. Constitutional enforcement operating with mathematical precision. Democratic institutions proving their capacity for self-correction under extreme stress. That's not political victory. That's constitutional vindication operating exactly as the founders designed. This changes everything.